Alexis de Tocqueville, of an aristocratic French family, compared and contrasted the roles of the genders and the qualities and characteristics of each gender in order to determine that each sex is uniquely important to the democratic system established in America and to each other's successes. As the study of natural sciences gained momentum, Alexis de Tocqueville was inspired to evaluate the progress of the social sciences. In 1831, he had the opportunity to evaluate the large-scale democratic system that the United States had created with Gustave de Beaumont de la Bonniniere, and he was inspired to write Democracy in America in 1835 to spread his findings. Tocqueville began by commenting on the roles that women in America had accepted, and how they decided not to enter the social and political arenas by their own will. Tocqueville states that in no country has such care been taken as in America to trace two clearly distinct lines of actions for the two sexes and to make them keep pace with one another, but in two pathways that are always different. American women never manage the outward concerns of the family or conduct a business or take part in a political life, nor are they, on the other hand, ever compelled to perform the rougher. Hence, it is that the women of America, who often exhibit a masculine strength of understanding and a manly energy, generally preserve great delicacy of personal appearance and always retain the manners of women, although they sometimes show that they have the hearts and minds of men. Tocqueville recognized the idea that women, while they were not completely equal in functions and how they were viewed, were not inferior to men, and that this was manifested as they performed different functions that suited their strengths. Tocqueville asserted that taking on the duties of the public arena did not qualify men as superior. Women were still preserving their delicacy only because they were willingly following the paths that society accepted before them and putting their assets to use in a different way, and for this reason they should not be seen as lesser. It is Tocqueville's definitive and optimistic tone towards women's successes and potential, and in America's advanced delineation of the roles of the genders, that made his argument believable and empowering. In this way, it can be said that America was more socially advanced than their European counterparts. Tocqueville was referring to the education that women in America received before they entered married life when he stated that women's minds closely resembled the minds of men. In this way, he was proactively disproving any claims that women in America were confined to the house because of their intellectual inability, and he was making it known that women made the conscious decision to adhere to the social standards of the time by handling the private life while men acquired wealth. Tocqueville described schools that exposed girls to the outside world of domestic duties. He said that American morals are, I think, the most chaste in the nation. One cause is that the women generally receive a rational education. The transition from the status of girl to married woman has no dangers for them. An extensive education outlined married life for women in order to show women what to expect, and it outlined their options, making submission to men a choice. At the same time, the era of reforms was taking place that further increased women's access to an education. Tocqueville states, "It would seem in Europe, where man so easily submits to the despotic sway of woman, that they are nevertheless deprived of some of the greatest attributes of the human species and considered as seductive but imperfect beings. And, what may well provoke astonishment, women ultimately look upon themselves in the same light and almost consider it as a privilege that they are entitled to show themselves as futile, feeble, and timid. The women in America claim no such privileges." Tocqueville evaluated how embracing domestic duties was a sacrifice that should have been characterized by strength and honor. So it should have been associated with pride by the American woman. Tocqueville embarked on a journey to America after he was inspired by Professor Francois Guizenot's lectures on the rise of the middle class. Tocqueville seized the opportunity to assess the American structure in the context of democracy after Louis Philippe became king and required an oath of loyalty from all, which threatened Tocqueville and motivated him to look for an escape. The oath was an ideal excuse to observe American democracy. Like Horace Mann and Catherine Beecher, the educational reformists of that time specifically fought to improve women's education. Tocqueville saw the potential for women and the benefit they could have on a country. Tocqueville was stating that women in France were not known for their intelligence, but that their defining quality was their lack of outstanding qualities besides for being feeble and timid. Ironically, he argued that that was a privilege that the American women were deprived of. Tocqueville was referring to the innocence that the French woman maintained with such a limited education. He suggested in this passage that being sheltered from the opportunities aside from housework meant an easier submission to the life inside their home because they did not know what opportunities they were missing outside of the household. Tocqueville used the word privilege because being futile and timid was the easier path to take. In this case, obtaining an education and living in touch with reality had its caveats, but the Americans chose it in order to avoid negligence, and because education meant an understanding and deeper appreciation for life. Being trusted to abide by social expectations even after being educated, and the chance to diversify women education was more valuable than being suppressed. Likewise, this also furthers the trend that submission is a choice by women, since they have the education necessary to at least try to assert themselves in the public arena and are not confined to the house because of a lack of knowledge. Tocqueville shows that the concept of republican motherhood is furthered as women are voluntarily accepting the call to raise their children this way. Children were carried out the same roles their parents did in society as they were being raised. Thus, the Americans do not think that man and woman have either the duty or the right to perform the same offices, but they show an equal regard for both their respective parts, and though their lot is different, they consider both of them as being of equal value. They do not give to the courage the same form or the direction as to that of man, but they never doubt her courage, and if they hold that man and his partner ought not always to exercise their intellect and understanding in the same manner, they at least believe the understanding of the one to be as sound as that of the other, and her intellect to be as clear. Thus, while they have allowed the social inferiority of woman to continue, they have done all they could to raise her morally and intellectually to the level of man. And in this respect they appear to me to have excellently understood the true principle of democratic improvement. Tocqueville said that the Americans trusted the female gender according to their expectations of females. Tocqueville pointed out that the women perpetuated their subordinate status throughout the ages when he stated that they have allowed the social inferiority of women to continue. By raising children with the same principles they were raised with, they encouraged the social complex that features women at the bottom, and they perpetuated democracy as they know it, which really does make women indispensable to the system and shows their insubordination is a choice. As a result, onlookers continue to trust women, but through the ages they have trusted them with different responsibilities from men. Many assign the term of inferior to women because they did not care to consider what preceded a woman's confinement to the house. Others judged based on men's extensive responsibilities and failed to realize that women were often just as intellectually equipped as men were. Likewise, Tocqueville's purpose in writing this excerpt was to show that women, being seen differently, is acceptable, but they should not be assumed as inferior just because they were taking care of the domestic work. Likewise, in this excerpt, Tocqueville commented on how dependent democracy is on both males and females, since it is the security that men can garnish from knowledge of productive wives at home that allow them to thrive. The more that men strive to remove themselves from the domestic realm, the more they are highlighting their dependence on their wives. Tocqueville was worried after the rise of Napoleon about the state of affairs in France. After the American Revolution, America validated their existence as a free nation embarking on the journey to become a world power. Tocqueville remarks that Americans understood democracy and they fostered the principles that led to prosperity, so naturally he was inspired to study it to apply it to France. Tocqueville continues by saying, "As for myself, I do not hesitate to avow that although the women of the United States are confined within the narrow circle of domestic life, and their situation is in some respects one of extreme dependence, I have nowhere seen women occupying a loftier position, and if I were asked now that I am drawing to the close of this work, in which I have spoken of so many important things done by Americans, to what singular prosperity and growing strength of the people ought mainly to be attributed, I should reply to the superiority of their women. Marriage up to this point in many places had meant complete submission to the desires of husband, but American women spent the first half of their lives bettering themselves for their own amusement and benefit. Learning for the sake of knowing, not for the sake of applying knowledge, but just in order to understand the world and pass the knowledge on to children, did indeed qualify the American woman as superior to French women. In reference to Tocqueville's concluding statement, when Tocqueville was in America, he observed, 100 times have I seen women alone with their husband or mother, without a serving woman, or almost without luggage. Generally speaking, they never complain about anything. American women, failing to input their opinion and receding from the public, said more than words could have said about their character. American women receding could be attributed to their education another reason why they are superior. This excerpt's purpose was to definitively state that women in America understood democracy with less exposure to it outside of the house. They possibly understood democracy better than men, since they were willingly renouncing a life of intellectual cultivation and resigned to the domestic duties, but they still knew that they had the potential. Their domestic duties did not define them as inferior, unlike some men assumed. Tocqueville waited until his public career failed in order to record his thoughts regarding politics, which allowed him to gain insight and knowledge about the innate social issues transpiring within society. In his work, How Americans Understand the Equality of the Sexes, he supplemented the view that many males had held by calling American women inferior with some new perspective, showing that women are not inferior, but they are equally and willingly doing as much as men for the system of democracy. He highlights the fact that men are just as dependent on women as women are on men.